The night wind moved through the cottonwoods, like a whisper carrying secrets, too old for the earth to remember. And as the embers of the fire dimmed, she sat there between two worlds that would never truly forgive her. Ilara's fingers trembled as she tightened her shawl, the scent of sage and smoke clinging to her hair, reminding her of the life she was already losing. Behind her lay the tribal lands, the only home she had ever known, where every footstep was guided by ancestors, and every choice weighed against tradition. Ahead of her, beyond the dark stretch of hills and scrub, was the ranch, dusty, isolated, and impossibly quiet, where a man waited who had no claim on her blood, yet somehow held her heart more firmly than any vow sworn at birth. The elder's words still rang in her ears, sharp as flint against stone. A woman who chooses the outsider breaks the circle for all. They did not shout. They did not need to. Their disappointment was a heavier punishment than anger, and it pressed against her chest until breathing felt like betrayal itself. She had not planned to fall in love with Caleb Walker. It began as necessity, as so many dangerous things do. A storm had torn through the valley months earlier, flooding the lower grazing lands and leaving half the tribe's winter stores ruined. Caleb's ranch sat on higher ground, and when the river receded, he was the only one with hay left to spare. Ilara was sent with two others to negotiate, not because she was special, but because she was quiet, observant, and unlikely to cause trouble. Caleb had met them at the fence line, his hat pulled low, his hands rough from work, his eyes wary but not unkind. He listened more than he spoke. When he agreed to help, he asked for nothing in return, except time to move the supplies safely. That should have been the end of it, but fate, cruel and patient, had other plans. Their paths crossed again and again after that. A broken fence, a sick calf, a shared moment during a long sunset when the sky burned red and gold, and silence felt easier than words. Ilara found herself noticing the way Caleb never interrupted her stories, even when her English faltered, or how he looked away respectfully when tribal rituals passed near his land. He was different from the men she had been warned about, the ones who took without understanding, who saw her people as relics instead of living souls. And that difference frightened her more than outright cruelty ever could, because it made choosing him possible. Now, sitting in the cold night, Ilara pressed her palm against the earth, grounding herself as she had been taught since childhood. The land did not judge her. It did not ask her to choose. It simply existed, patient and enduring, even as people tore themselves apart over love and loyalty. She closed her eyes and saw her mother's face, stern yet gentle, the woman who had taught her to braid sweetgrass and read the weather by the movement of birds. Her mother had said nothing during the council meeting, but her silence had been louder than any accusation. That hurt the most. When Ilara finally stood, her legs felt unsteady, as though the ground itself was trying to pull her back. She took one step forward, then another, and with each step, the weight of her decision grew heavier. She did not look back. If she did, she knew she would run, and this moment, this fragile, terrifying courage, would be lost forever. The path to the ranch was barely visible, but she followed it by instinct, by memory, by the stubborn beating of her heart. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled and the sound echoed like a warning. Caleb was awake when she arrived. He always was, rising before dawn and sleeping lightly, as if the land itself demanded his vigilance. The porch light flicked on as she approached, and for a moment she froze, caught between flight and confession. When he opened the door, concern flashed across his face, quickly followed by something deeper, relief. Perhaps, or hope, though he would never have named it as such. He did not touch her. He did not speak. He simply stepped aside and let her in, understanding that whatever had brought her here was too heavy for greetings. Inside, the ranch house was simple and warm, smelling faintly of coffee and old wood. Ilara sat at the small table, her hands clasped tightly together, and told him everything. About the council, about the choice she had made, about the price she knew she would pay. Caleb listened, his jaw tightening with every word, not from anger but from the realization that loving him had cost her more than he had ever dared to imagine. When she finished, the silence stretched between them, thick and fragile. Finally he spoke, his voice low and steady. "I won't ask you to stay," he said, "and I won't ask you to leave. Whatever you decide next, it has to be yours." Those words broke something open inside her. She had expected pleading or promises or fear. Instead, he gave her freedom, the very thing she had been denied. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she covered her face, ashamed of her weakness. But Caleb moved closer, not touching her, just close enough that she could feel his presence, solid and real. "I'm not choosing you because I was pushed away," she said finally, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I'm choosing you because I want to, and because I believe what comes next matters." What came next, though, was something neither of them could have predicted. News traveled fast in the valley, carried by whispers and watchful eyes. By morning, people were already talking about Ilara's defiance, about Caleb's influence, about what it would mean if a woman so deeply rooted in tradition turned her back on it. Some spoke with anger, others with fear, a few with curiosity. But no one expected Ilara to do what she did next. Instead of hiding on the ranch, instead of disappearing quietly as so many had assumed, she prepared to return to the tribal lands, not to beg forgiveness, but to speak. Caleb tried to stop her, not out of control, but out of concern. He knew the risks. He knew how unforgiving pride could be when challenged publicly. But Ilara's resolve was unshakable. "If I leave without saying anything," she told him, "then they'll only remember the betrayal. If I go back and speak, maybe they'll remember the truth." At dawn, she walked back across the land she had crossed hours earlier, her heart pounding not with fear, but with purpose. The same elders who had watched her leave now watched her return, surprise flickering across their faces. She stood before them, alone, unarmed, and utterly unyielding. She spoke of love, yes, but not as rebellion. She spoke of survival, of bridges instead of walls, of the way the world was changing whether they allowed it or not. She reminded them of their own teachings, that strength was not found in rigid refusal, but in wisdom and balance. Her voice shook at times, but it did not break. And when she finished, the silence that followed was unlike any she had ever known. It was not judgment, it was uncertainty. That uncertainty spread beyond the council fire, rippling through the tribe and the valley alike. Some began to question old rules. Others hardened their stance. And in the midst of it all, Ilara returned to the ranch, knowing that whatever storm she had stirred was only beginning. She did not yet know how deeply her choice would shake both worlds, or how far the consequences would reach. She only knew that there was no turning back now. The valley did not wake gently after Ilara's return. It stirred like a wounded animal, cautious and restless, every sound carrying suspicion. Word of her speech spread beyond the council fire, reshaped by fear, pride, and curiosity until it no longer belonged to her alone. Some said she had challenged the elders with disrespect. Others whispered that she had spoken with the voice of the ancestors themselves. What could not be denied was this: something had shifted. Old certainties cracked, and through those cracks poured questions no one had dared ask before. On the ranch, Caleb felt the change before he fully understood it. Riders passed more often along the boundary line. Strangers lingered longer at the fence, pretending to admire the land while measuring him with their eyes. He knew what it meant to stand out in a tight-knit valley, and he knew how quickly isolation could turn into hostility. Yet when Ilara returned to him after facing the council, her shoulders straighter, her gaze steadier, he understood that retreat was no longer an option. Whatever storm was coming, they would face it together, not as an escape, but as a stand. The shock came days later, and it came from Ilara herself. Instead of withdrawing into the quiet life everyone expected, of a woman who had crossed a forbidden line, she began to act. She traveled between the ranch and the tribal lands, openly, deliberately refusing to hide. She helped organize shared workdays during the drought, bringing ranch hands and tribal families together to repair wells and clear irrigation channels. When tempers flared, she stood between them, calm but unyielding, reminding both sides that the land did not care about their divisions. At first, people resisted. Then slowly, reluctantly, they followed. The elders were forced to watch as something extraordinary unfolded. Cooperation replaced suspicion. Children played together where their parents once turned away. Trade resumed, not as charity, but as partnership. Ilara had not chosen one world over the other. She had chosen to connect them. That was what truly shocked everyone. Her choice of the rancher had not weakened her people. It had challenged them to grow. Tradition was not erased, but tested, reshaped, strengthened by reality. The final turning point came when a wildfire tore through the northern ridge, threatening both the ranch and the tribal lands. There was no time for arguments, no room for pride. They fought the fire side by side, passing water, digging lines, saving homes and lives. When the flames finally died, the valley stood scarred but united. In the ash-filled silence, the elders approached Ilara, not with punishment, but with acknowledgement. They did not apologize. They did not fully agree, but they accepted that her path had protected them all. Ilara stood at the edge of the land at sunset, Caleb beside her, the sky burning with the same colors as the night she first left. This time the weight in her chest was gone. She had not abandoned her tribe nor lost herself in love. She had become something new, proof that courage can honor the past while building the future. And that, more than her choice, was what changed everything. If this ending moved you, remember, stories like this exist because of you. Subscribe to the channel to support powerful stories of courage, love and impossible choices. And don't miss the next story that might just change the way you see the world.